Welcome everybody to TMM Reading. We're here joined by Professor Laura Chamberlain and Anna O'Riordan, and we're here to talk about measuring ROI and discuss the importance of it and how to do it more effectively and whether we should be doing it as well.
Thank you.
That covers it.
Welcome, ladies.
Thank you very much for having us. Where should we start? Shall I start with a question for the audience?
Let's do that.
I can't help it. So, because I'm an academic, I like to get a bit of audience participation because there is nothing worse than people sat there with their arms folded thinking, oh yeah, you're going to talk about this, are you?
Especially on this topic.
It can be quite a dry topic, but we're going to bring it to life. As we are a room of people who absolutely love marketing, I'm making a big assumption there, but you are here at TMM, so it's a fairly valid assumption to make. I would like to ask you what your favourite bit, and I'm using that word very loosely, of marketing is. It's an interesting one because people's eyes just went, oh, to the ceiling. I'm not sure. Does anybody? Yes, go on, Gemma.
Connecting the dots of everything.
Connecting all the dots strategically.
Seeing when someone gets it, like the message you've tried to craft, and they understand what you want them to feel, how you want them to react.
Yeah.
Having an impact.
Having an impact.
Yeah. Much more succinct.
When it actually works.
Sorry?
When it actually works. And
when it works.
That's my favourite part.
Did you say when it makes money?
Yeah. When you can see that someone has bitten and you wheel, and then
you've gone fishing.
That's it. That's the best part for me.
Yeah, because you know it's working.
Yes.
What does working mean? What does that mean? Revenue. Is marketing all about making money? Oh, Harriet's just gone very much like, no.
It resonates with them that they've engaged with it. They see themselves in whatever it is that you've said to them.
Right. Oh, there's a gentleman at the back. Put his hand.
It's about understanding the needs and the wants of your customer.
A beautiful textbook answer. I mean, when I teach Marketing 101, that's where we begin. But yes, you're right. It's about understanding the needs and the wants of the customer. There's a really interesting tension that we face in marketing, right? Because we have to understand human beings, people, customers. And I say this to people who work in B2B, B2C, it does not matter. It is all about human beings and people and that engagement, that connecting, having an impact. But it's being part of a business and we've got to bring money in through the front door. And the reason why this topic is so interesting is because the line between the activities that we do in marketing and the money coming through the front door is not a straight and direct line. And that's why we've decided to be crazy.
On a Wednesday night.
But we really want to investigate this and think about this practically because there are so many different elements to this that need exploring and talking about in a way that's not like, this is what you should do, this is the only way to think about things. We very much believe that we can look at theory, of course I'm going to say that, I'm a professor of marketing, but we also have to be anchored in practice and understand how we can think critically about these and apply them to ourselves.
And actually, Esteem, which is something we co-founded to tackle the problems that we see in marketing, both in how marketing is understood by businesses, but also in empowering marketers to have the right conversations in the right way. We ran a survey at the end of last year, and we asked marketers and non-marketers, what's the biggest challenge that you see for next year? And the answer was actually the same. It was ROI. But there was a slight nuance to that. So, marketers were focused on how do I prove my worth? How do I prove the value of what I'm doing? And the non-marketers were scratching their heads going, I don't quite understand what this ROI is. I don't quite understand how we've got there. So the same driver, the same challenge, but looking at it from different angles. And the reason that we choose to talk about ROI together is because there's a disconnect. And the more we talk about it and surface those kind of challenges around, the more empowered marketers are to give the right information, and that's to the benefit of marketing and its credibility. So that was the topic choice.
Indeed. Amazing. Brilliant. Thank you. We have another question for the audience, I believe.
We do. Do you want me to ask that one as well?
I can ask.
You ask.
Yeah.
Go for it. Right?
Who here tracks ROI?
Do I track elements? Like some bits you can't track, right? Well, punchline.
Have you talked to Anna and I about this before?
But yeah, there is elements of return on investment that I, of course, do track because I'm asked to, and also I want to know that things I'm doing are having certain impacts. It's nice to be able to go, I've ticked that box, that's done that.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyone else?
Peter pulled a great face
There was a
then.
half hand up.
We sort of do. We're getting better every week, I would say, at knowing where the leads are coming from and what's kind of moving the dial, but I would say there's still quite a bit of work to do. I think fundamentally we don't actually spend a lot of money on marketing, so tracking the ROI is really about how much does it cost us to have people doing the marketing compared to what they're able to produce and then bring in. So it's I guess it's, as a very small business, it's different for everyone.
I would say yes, like in individual channels, looking at like how things are performing, but the thing that I just struggle with overall is the fact that you probably have multiple things happening concurrently at one single time. So how are you ever proving the success of one channel over another versus the cumulative effect of everything? And some things are short-term, some things are long-term. So once you start to sort of unravel it, it just becomes a bit of a point where you're just like, I just don't know what to do. So what, like...
And that's the point at which you go, too difficult, run away. Not you, just generally, we do. And that's normal behaviour, and we kind of, we understand that. We're not saying that that's a wrong thing to do, because it is like this kind of octopus of a situation where you're just like, I'm trying to make sense of this. And there are external pressures that are part of that.
And I think, ROI has become this sort of holy grail. For marketers, as I said, to prove I'm giving some value, but also for companies, to your point, how much should we be investing? What should we be doing? The challenge that we have with that is that it's not about a single number. It's not just about a financial return. So I think we're going to explore a little bit.
Yeah, we are. We are indeed, yes. I was going to say, how do you know if you're measuring the right thing?
Yeah.
Is there a topic around that as well?
So yeah, I mean, I think I was going to get there, and I didn't want to preempt your question. But one of the challenges is very often for marketers, they don't have a clear view, perhaps from the top. What are we trying to achieve? Okay, so it then becomes quite hard to say, are we measuring the right thing? Because if you're measuring it on clicks, or the efficiency of that spend on the clicks, you're like, yeah, we've done really, really well. We've brought all these people in, it only cost us 36p a click, whatever it, I mean, in my dreams, but that's what we could say. However, that may not be valuable to a CEO who is thinking more long term. So, measuring the right thing is really, really important, but being clear on what it is we're trying to achieve. I think the other part of that is we need to stop this narrative around it's just one financial metric. I put this much money in, I got this much money out. And the reason for that is, there isn't always causation, isn't always correlation. It's not because I did this, to your point, there are lots of things happening. If I'm a ice cream company and the weather suddenly has a freak kind of heat wave in March and the sales go up, that could have a hell of a lot more to do with sales going up than anything marketing has done. Although marketing may have ridden that wave and got it out through social media or to email database, whatever it might be. So it's complex, as we're saying, but being clear on ultimately what are the goals of the company, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in terms of how do we tell that story and align to what those goals are is the first starting point, I think. The second thing around measuring the right thing, from my perspective is timing, and I think you talked about long and short, Harriet. You know, sometimes we can dismiss the value of something because we're measuring at the wrong point. So I'll give you an example from my, you know, I'm a freelancer, I'm a consultant, and I work with all sorts of businesses, and I was working with a tech company, B2B. I pull that face because my sweet spot is B2C. But, you know, being a tech company, they had invested in a podcast. And this podcast, I think they invested for about 4 or 5 months. And then the CEO booked a power hour with me and he said, didn't work, we're binning it, waste of money, why are we doing this? And I said, how long have you been doing it? 4 months, we've had no sales. Now, the lead time for their product was between 9 and 12 months. So, you know, consideration time, buying committees, all those things, and he hadn't thought that they'd binned it off. So he measured that value equation and he did it at the wrong time. And his marketing team hadn't thought to say, well, actually, or they had tried and it not been heard possibly, actually it's not like this. And let's look at the small things that are giving us an indication of the value. And so you'll hear us talk a lot more about value than return as we're measuring the right thing.
Can I pick up on that? Yeah. Sorry, Ray, we're running roughshod all over the lovely structure that we put together. I think that's a really important point. You know, ROI is a snapshot at one point in time, and it's really, really narrow. And, you know, you started to say about, you know, your tracking elements and doing it over time. And you have to also look at the trend. It's not that it's not a valid measure, but there are lots of things that we can look at that build out a picture. And I think the nuance around that is that, as Anna was just starting to talk about, we need to think about how we communicate it. But the pressure really comes when you've got somebody, an external, and by external I mean external to marketing, stakeholder who is obsessed with needing the ROI. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had a CFO bearing down on you, or a CEO saying, yes, but I want the number. And
I've had someone walk out of a room many years ago because financial director wanting a number. So what return did we get, Anna? And I said, I can't give you that number. Well, of course you can give me that number. I said, I can't give you that number because there's so many complications in this, and this was early in digital days. We didn't have as much tracking and data, and actually I think sometimes we have too much data now, and you get into complex models over things that don't need to be. But yeah, I've had someone walk out of a room and basically say, I'm not talking to marketing anymore because you're spending, and we had quite big budgets, but you're not able to give me that financial number. The conversation I tried to have with him, very successfully as he walked out, was that actually the problem with just looking at what's the return on my spend is it doesn't mean you've hit your objective. So I could get, you know, 5 times my spend back in sales from the campaign I've run. But actually, my objective was to bring new people in to be buying, new customers. And the promotion I ran gave a discount. And it cost us money, but we got 5 times more sales. Brilliant, short term, fantastic. Have we grown as a company? Have we got into that new audience that we wanted to get into? No, we haven't. We've actually just discounted the sales we would have got anyway from customers. So there's a lot of nuance around things, and this is where we have to make sure before we even start a campaign or a project or a plan that we're aligned, I think, on what it is we need to do for the business and how can we link to those goals.
It's reductive to think that money through the front door equals growth in that context. And that's the nuance, and that's the complexity that we're actually linking into here.
Yeah, and I think for you with events, it's the same thing, right?
Exactly, yeah, because there's so much of it is measured by how many tickets that sold, because that's like an immediate return, but actually, you know, how much their audience has grown as a result of the campaign beforehand, and also, you know, what the follow-up points have been after the event. It's also really key to measure those side of things as well. But yeah, the kind of taking a snapshot before an event on the audience size is a real eye-opener for many, for sure.
Interesting. Okay.
So is that more about awareness as well then? Right. So it might not be the ticket sales,
Yeah.
but like the
like-
longer term.
What's value?
It's
What does
bringing-
value mean?
Exactly, it's bringing more, more sign-ups to their newsletter or their event updates or whatever. It's bringing more people into the ether that campaign has done. And then from there you nurture it. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. From there you nurture it on, and hopefully it'll turn into a sale eventually. But yeah. Sorry.
But at the same time, because I do agree, but at the same time I disagree, because ultimately you've got to make money, like likes and follows and shares and all of that stuff. That's fine if you're Coca-Cola and you can afford to play the really long game, but most businesses can't afford to play a long branding game. They've got to play a quicker game.
Wow. Professor Hat goes on here. I don't know if you're familiar with Les Binet and Peter Field's work. I'm more than happy to share a copy of the report with you. They wrote a report called The Long and Short of It a number of years ago. And I'm going to give you a real top line on this. But there's a beautiful diagram in there that I butcher regularly, which basically looks at a really short spiky line that goes like this, which is about sales activations, so getting money in through the front door. And there is a sort of longer, slower build line that goes up like this, but ultimately ends up bringing in more for the company and financially. That's your brand line. And they talked about, should there be a rule around a split? So the classic is the 60-40 rule. So 60% on building your brand, because that's the thing that ensures your long-term growth for your organisation, and 40% of your budget should go on to short-term sales activations. The 60-40 rule, as any rule that we have, is hotly contested, and people need to think critically about it. But the core premise of the idea that actually we have activities that are designed to do the kind of conversions, the sales immediately in the short term is really powerful. But we should never neglect the power of the long-term brand build, that kind of straight growth line. Because if people don't know about the brand, if people don't recognize the brand, they don't connect with the brand, it's not top of mind, it's not something that people recognize, then you're going to end up being dead in the water. The temptation is to chase that lovely little spiky line, because you can see that ROI, that's what the spiky line is. When you invest in things that are brand build, in that sort of longer term thing, if you do a brand building activity like an event, for example, and they're like, this costs loads of money, but I'm not seeing the immediate spiky sales that come from off the back of it, then that is where the ROI conversation becomes quite tricky. So there's kind of an interesting contextual piece around that's really important to find a way to explain and to convincingly persuade your stakeholders why these two things actually can work together. And one of the things that we've talked about quite a lot is the fact that brand build and sales activations don't actually need to be completely separate, so they can serve multiple purposes. So if you're working in a small organisation or a startup, you don't have to think about, I'm going to do this big brand build campaign over here and some sort of sales activation stuff over here. They can serve multiple purposes, but it's being really conscious and reflective and understanding why you're doing what you're doing in that context, to understand the impact you're trying to have. So going back to that impact piece, and the fact that some of the stuff you're doing, you will not see a return on that investment for quite some time. And there is some stuff that goes into the ether that is working, but it's quite tricky to capture, because maybe don't have the market research budget to sort of take the temperature out in the world about how your brand is being perceived and all that kind of stuff.
With small companies is that
Exactly.
that like if you've been doing it for a long time and you know something's going to work, but if they're tight on budget, so they don't want to invest a lot in the branding and stuff, which is fair enough, you can't then ask for another couple of 100,000 to research to prove the 100,000 that you paid, and it's kind of, that's where I struggle with the ROI proving, and it's the mitigating, which is similar to what you were saying, like mitigating the risk. So it's like a risk to sink X amount in this, because it's not a sales activation campaign, but in 6 months time or 12 months time it will have an impact, but you've kind of all got to sit firm and be strong and be consistent. That's sometimes the panic, the example you said, of going, oh, well, this, you know, we're doing the podcast, but then lacking the commitment to the consistency of it. I think panic.
I mean, I work with a lot of small businesses these days. I started out in big businesses when I was employed, and what I would say is, yes, cash flow is king, right? You've got to have the cash coming in. You've got to make sure that that business can sustain in the short term to get to the long term, absolutely. But coming back to your point, one of the things that I do, because I will never, ever say to a client, this is the return you're going to get from this, because I can't, hand on heart, I will not give a number. And so some clients will say, I don't want to work with you because you're not giving me that number, because they won't understand it. But actually what I often talk about is, what is the cost to your business of not testing an alternative route alongside? So you safeguard what's working. You know, if that's short term, I've got a client at the moment, they're a leisure space, and they're pretty much the core of their marketing is focused on performance. So ads through Meta, ads through Google, and they're getting great results. They've got good occupancy. However, they're 2 sites at the moment, they're going to scale to 10 within the next 3 years. In order to keep that machine going, the marketing budget has got to go like this. And actually, when you're a hospitality leisure space and people are experiencing, you've got ready-made marketers there. If you're doing a good job, you've got a good product. So, you know, one of the debates we've just had this week is, yeah, your security blanket, right now, I get it, let's keep doing it. You've got it honed, you're, you know, efficient spend on an ROI basis, but that's just efficient spend. It's not necessarily helping you get where you need to be in the long term. So your actual goal is to scale, and we can't scale like this because your budgets aren't going to scale in that way. So I can't always give the answer of this is what it will be, but what I can do is draw examples and highlight and spotlight why it can't just be that.
And maybe like demonstrating the lack of. So I know, I think you're using something about can I justify the spend on the marketing head, but then what's the cost of not having the marketing? It's like, but being able to, it's the proving of that is tricky, I guess.
It is, but I think the more you can draw parallels, and particularly with small businesses as well, it doesn't have to be the big examples, but you can see people on the high street. You know, if you're with an independent retailer and one's closed, you know, look at, well, what were they doing? Were they just doing one short-term promotion after another, or were they actually embedding themselves in the community, building strategic partnerships that drove footfall on a regular basis without high spend, but with marketing brain, right? Or somebody building that community. So for me, I don't like the term return, because I think it just comes so much down to monetary value, which is important, I'm not knocking it, but I think it's about seeing the broader value and putting it always into that context of where are we trying to get to and how is that doing. And yeah, you know, no business owner I've ever worked with and they put their money in is happy if I go, oh, but look at the new followers you've got, you know. But if you actually say, okay, you know, this is the first step in the journey, these are indicators. And I think, you know, you look at that a lot in terms of portfolios of measurement.
Putting realistic times in, you said about the wrong point in time. Yeah.
When are you measuring? What are you measuring? Is it too soon to judge? And part of that, and I say this as a consultant, is being really clear up front. You know, if I'm going to tell you to put a podcast, I'm not just going to say, oh, you do a podcast. I'm going to say, this is why we're doing the podcast. This is just to manage the expectations, what you're going to see after 3 months. This is what you'll see in 6 months. This is what you'll hopefully see in 12 months. Not a hard number, but these are the indicators that we start to look for, and context, I think, is everything up front.
Yeah, up front.
Yeah.
And it's having a portfolio approach to measurement, because I was working with somebody recently who was a marketer who was frustrated at the CEO in the organisation. They were a rapidly growing organisation for a while, and the growth was stuttering. And the CEO was absolutely obsessed with chasing the ROAS. And it was a race to the bottom. And no matter what this marketer said, could not get the CEO to see anything different other than chasing the ROAS. And what I worked with her on was this idea of how to introduce a portfolio approach to measurement and thinking about that staged approach to when is it appropriate to have indicators and managing the expectations of the stakeholders, so who needs to know what at what point in time, and also understanding what they're expecting to hear. If you've got a CFO who's willing to walk out of a room on you because they are absolutely obsessed with ROI, there's a precedent to that conversation that's really important, and there's lots of different ways and techniques you can use to manage the conversation, manage the way you present information, and manage the way you report.
Yeah.
I just did a slappy hand there, report information, which reporting is very important as well.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of, as marketers, a lot of it comes down to empathy at the end of the day. Understanding your customer, understanding your audience, but also understanding your stakeholders and the lenses. So to Laura's point, you know, if you've got this staged approach and this portfolio, it still doesn't mean that everyone's going to understand or buy into that. You know, cue the guy that walked out a while ago. And actually, if you can understand what matters to those stakeholders, so if I'm a CEO, I'm thinking about longer term growth, I'm thinking about sustainability, I might be thinking about cash flow, I might be thinking, if I'm thinking about, if I'm the FD, I'm thinking about cash flow for sure, I'm thinking about return, I'm thinking about valuations, I'm thinking about all of those things. If I'm an HR director in a bigger organisation, I'm thinking about talent, how do I attract them, you know, what do I do? So everyone has their own agenda, and I think where marketing reporting often falls down, and I've seen a lot of this and have been guilty of it early in my career too, is we put a report that's a bit of a laundry list. And we do it for two reasons. One is, look all the things I've done, I'm worth something. I can't give you an exact number, but I've done all this, I'm very, very busy. And yes, you are, and yes, you've probably done some amazing things. But to a busy CEO who doesn't understand what CPC is, or you know what's going on with clicks and conversions from Google that don't match the sales data, you know, that just sort of loses them a little bit, and I think that erodes trust. Whereas if you're very selective in what you're reporting and what you're showing, and you frame it within the, you know, the goals, you know, you say, well, actually, we had loads of followers coming because of this event. They didn't come to this event, but they started following us and they started interacting, and they actually signed up for the email. And yes, that's not money directly in the pocket. But what it means is we've now got a bigger base. So when we launch that product next month, we can now go, it's framing things in the right way rather than just using marketing jargon and trying to look very busy. And a lot of, you know, I offer a power hour session for founders and CEOs and marketers actually, but a lot of the CEO founders that come to me say, oh, I just don't understand any of this stuff that I'm getting in my report. It's meaningless. Like, okay, we have 5,000 people hit the website and it cost us this to bring them in, but I don't see the sales and I don't see, and so we're not telling the right story. So I think the empathy part is really, really important in what we're doing, and then having the right portfolio of indicators.
Definitely. Wow.
Sorry, you set us off and we just go.
The soapbox we're on. The soapbox stool.
We kind of skipped a few, like covered a couple of questions here already. But are there like some of the kind of alternative ways to think about ROI?
Okay, so there's the practical stuff. So, you know, the suite of measurement that can happen in the portfolio, and, you know, I could sit and talk about all the different things that we could measure, but, you know, that's not very interesting.
If you've got 90 minutes, we do run a session.
we can run a session on that. But actually, it links into what Anna was just talking about, really, and it's, for us, it's really that idea around value. And so, you know, talking to a room of marketers, it's not going to be a surprise that I'm going to say marketing is an engine of growth in an organisation, right? This is marketing 101 stuff. And the reason it's an engine of growth is because it is about creating value. Whenever I teach marketing 101, the first thing I talk about is what is marketing. And the classic definition of marketing is that it creates value for stakeholders in the business. Full stop, right? That's the core of the definition. So there's something there in terms of, and Anna sort of alluded to this earlier, it's actually not about thinking about return on investment, it's value for investment. And then really exploring that idea is what is the value that we're trying to achieve for the organisation? Because when we said earlier, is marketing all about making money? We talked about engagement, we talked about impact. There are lots of different things that marketing is there to do that come under this umbrella of this idea of value. So if you start there and think about that conversation in terms of what is the value that marketing is attempting to create for the organisation and its stakeholders, then that allows you to start creating kind of a structure around, okay, how do we get indicators of us creating that value? That then starts to feel like a portfolio that may include some financials at some point, and this is where the timeline around it comes to bear, because you would never necessarily talk about financials at a certain point where it might be more relevant to talk about impact or followers or whatever that might be. But if you can then start to tell that story of this is the story of the value that the marketing activities and the strategy is trying to create, and this is where the indicators are going to come from, and this is what a green flag looks like, and if we see this red flag, this is important, and it's taking people on that journey with you. That's where the sort of alternative measures come to the fore. So it's not a straight swap like ROI for X, and that could be anything from, people talk about customer lifetime value or lots of different things. It's around thinking very strategically about this idea of value, and that being the thing that we're trying to create as a result of the investment in the marketing function.
Yeah, and I think it's hard, particularly for smaller businesses, because in a bigger organisation, you spend a lot of money on things like brand tracking. Mm-hmm. So you see the equity, so you can start to get a number that people like, for all the money you've spent on your wonderful advertising. And in a smaller business, that's not possible, and who would do it? It's just not what we need. But there are proxies, so we can look at things like share of search, versus our competitors. So we can go in and say, well, okay, Google's quite helpful like that. Let's look at the trends. Let's understand how much are they looking for us over whoever it might be. So we can start to wrap that story not directly around followers or engagement and things that have come about. But it's got to be framed in a way that your audience, whether it's the CFO or the CEO or the HR, can understand it's bringing value to their world as well. Otherwise, you have them walk out.
So we've looked at the things, sort of the different ways to look at it and think about long-term and short-term. What are the implications of not measuring ROI?
Well, you're flying blind. Now, I say that because I'm thinking of it as a VOI, a value on investment, because the financial number alone isn't particularly always meaningful in the way. But yeah, you're flying blind, and I think, depending on whether you're employed or, you're self-employed, having an understanding of the value that you're bringing or your actions are bringing is the only way to start to build that kind of trust and that momentum in the organisation. And actually with marketing, we can't do it on our own, because otherwise we're just promotion, and there are 4 Ps in marketing, so that's another story, another soapbox that I like to get on. But if we haven't got a seat at the table on things like price, on things like where we're putting it, distribution, we can't necessarily fulfill the role that we're supposed to be fulfilling. And so I think not being able to talk a good value story, return, however you want to position it, that's one implication. As a business owner, you don't know whether you're shooting in the air, are you getting a return, how much do I put in, what do I do? So there are a lot of implications, I think. But the big one for me is trust and actually being part of that growth story. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's being part of strategic conversations, and I think I don't think that matters in terms of where you are in terms of seniority and having a seat even at the top table. It's around being able to think strategically about everything that you're doing, but also having that context of knowing that it is like a temperature check. It's not the only piece of information that's needed. And so actually, in that context, it forces us to take that holistic view and to sort of take a step back and think strategically about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think that's really important. And it's very easy, we've all done it, to be on the hamster wheel and be in the weeds all the time and not to sort of elevate and take that moment and think, okay, what's the bigger picture here? How is this all fitting together? But also people shy away from ROI because they don't want to have a bad return on investment. They don't want the red flag to happen. People are scared of that because that also, I mean, you had the CFO walk out, but there's a really uncomfortable conversation if your return on investment isn't a positive one. And that's about risk. It's about having the space to test and learn. Because if you're in a situation where that can be really high stakes, we want to do the safe thing, but actually the white space, that innovative space, is the thing that might lead to the financial return. There's a lot there that means people shy away from that measuring the ROI because they don't want to have that scary conversation, which might actually not be a scary conversation if you put the right groundwork in.
I think some of the most powerful reports I've seen are ones that say, this is what we thought was going to happen, this is what happened, this is what we've learned, this is what we're now doing about it. And we shouldn't fear being honest and open about things because, and this is where I come back to, I will never promise a return on investment for something we're doing. I'll give them an idea of what I hope it to be, and I'll tell them how I'm going to, check that that's on track, or what we might do if it's starting not to look like it's going to happen. But actually that honesty and transparency, what you're doing is building the relationship, but also educating, because most of the people that as marketers we interact with don't know about marketing. They think they know about marketing very often because they're consumers and they use social and they go on a website, but they don't actually understand marketing and how it works. And it's not because I put an ad tomorrow that 5 people are going to come the next day. So I think being honest, transparent, saying we expected this is what happened, this is what we're doing about it, goes a long way in terms of that.
You've just reminded me of a story. I recently heard the CEO and CMO of Specsavers do a talk. Such an interesting company, really fascinating. And the CEO was saying, he really appreciated the CMO's patience, and he made the point, he said, no other body in the C-suite has as many opinions as the CMO. Nobody questions what the CTO is doing because they respect that that's sort of technical and it's not, sort of everybody's thing. But because we're all customers, marketing is very accessible and everybody has an opinion what the marketers are doing, right? The room is nodding violently. Everybody's just gone, yeah. But it's that accessibility, but also that means as well we feel a level of scrutiny, which is really taking a step back from it, it's really interesting, and it's why we have the safety blanket of the tactics and doing what's working and then not pushing ourselves in that way. And I thought it was really interesting, that interaction between the CEO and the CMO, and that observation to really be brought to the fore by an incredibly successful organisation. But they also talked about the idea that the founders of Specsavers, I didn't know this, are still involved in the company. They're in their 80s, which is amazing. And there was a campaign that was going to be run, and one of the founders didn't agree with it and was quite cross about it. But the CMO had the trust of the CEO and the trust of the founders, and they said, okay, well, we don't think, but go ahead. And it did really work. I mean, thankfully for them, but they're given that leash, but also that opportunity to try things, but it also not being catastrophic if that didn't work. And I think there's something there around risk and safety. And
I think so. And I think also you asked, what's the risk of not understanding return on investment and value. And actually another element of that is exactly that, which is you, as a marketer, you're obviously stretched in many ways, and particularly if you're in a company, people will come, can you just pretty this up? Can you do this? You know, all of those things we all have to bear with. And sometimes it's really important. But if you don't understand the value of the various things you're doing or what you're trying to achieve, it's really hard to kind of turn that situation around and say, you know, well, which of these is more important? What should I be doing? Whereas if you know, well, actually, no, I can't do that because I'm focused on this particular campaign because we know it's critical to this stage in our journey. And you know, it's a different framing. It's not, I don't do presentation prettying. It's actually a constructive way of saying what's the value of that. Now, if it's a presentation for a new retailer listing and you need it tomorrow, that's a different thing. But I think that's one of the risks of not understanding value. You can't have those conversations and push back and get an alignment on what should you be doing.
Can I say 2 points and then I'll let you ask some questions, sorry.
We did warn you, we talk a lot.
Yeah. So you just remind me of 2 things. One, Steve Chaluma, who's the CMO for Birdseye, Nomad Foods. No, he's CMO at Nomad Foods, which have Birdseye as part of their portfolio. It used to be Birdseye. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, Steve, if you're watching this. Years ago, he was telling me about how they put a bit of their budget aside for what he calls moonshots. So that idea of being really responsive. And there was an amazing campaign they ran probably around 2017-ish, where a newspaper that shall not be named ran a campaign or ran a story about how women, mothers specifically, who fed their children fish fingers were slummy mummies. And so Birdseye responded and got loads of mummy bloggers and influencers to sort of be saying, you know, we're proudly mums who sometimes sling fish fingers in front of our children, because I have 2 kids and there are times when that is absolutely 100% a necessary thing to do. But he kept a bit of the budget aside for what he called the moonshots, and being able to be responsive, but also take that risk and do stuff. So there is something there around sort of thinking structurally around how you can do things like that. And of course, not everybody's as big as Nomad Foods and Birdseye, but it's a really interesting principle. The other thing that, as you were talking then, Anna, that just popped into my head was around this idea of how all the activities that we're doing are aligning with the strategy for the organisation. So it's not just the marketing strategy in its silo, it's actually how, again, it comes to this value piece. What we are doing is adding value to the strategic mission, vision and direction of the organisation. And it reminds me of that famous story of somebody at NASA, and again, I'm going to tell this story really badly, but they were like sweeping the floor, and somebody said to them, what are you doing? And he said, I'm helping to put a man on the moon. Because everybody was so aligned in the organisation in terms of what they were contributing to achieving the goal of the organisation, which was to put somebody on the moon. And all the gentleman was doing was sweeping the floor. And it wasn't that he was indoctrinated, he just really understood his role in that organisation and how he was contributing value to doing what they were there to do. And I think there's something really important there around how the marketing aligns in that context and not losing sight of that as well. I managed to talk about fish fingers and NASA in the same breath. Even I'm impressed with that.
So as we're nearing kind of the end of our conversation, I've got a last couple of questions to go. But how do you handle ROI conversations with sort of the more skeptical stakeholders?
Let them walk out of the room. Shall I go? Yeah. I think it's about, I touched on it earlier, about really understanding what the optic is someone's going to be looking at this number. But also being really transparent if you can't give it. So that CFO that just wanted that one value, I did try and be really transparent with him. I was much younger in my career and I didn't have the same confidence that I would have now. But I think mapping out, taking a bit of time to plan those conversations, thinking about what they need, but also thinking about, is there a supporter in this organisation that gets marketing, that gets what we're trying to do? How can I use that person indirectly to help me bridge that conversation? And it's not just a marketing voice against, sales or against who can I enlist, I suppose, to start talking about these things. I think that's where I would start. About you?
Yeah, and surprisingly, same kind of vein. I think it's also around understanding where the skepticism comes from. So is it because it's lack of knowledge? I was just thinking of a CMO that I talk to quite regularly, whose CEO turned around and said, "I have no idea what you do all day," which is, you know, an interesting point. But it's not because they don't want to understand. It's just they don't know any information about what marketing does and the impact of marketing. So it could be an education piece. But it also is around managing expectations, I think, as well. If you do have allies, as Anna was saying, it's also then thinking about how you communicate with them, just in the same way that we communicate with all our stakeholders all the time. And I feel that there's a lot that's sort of reactive in reporting or presenting or thinking about this issue, rather than being proactive and being on the front foot. And that's a mindset shift in terms of thinking about how you think about this issue from the get-go. So from the very start of a project, a campaign, whatever it might be, building this into your strategy and your planning, but having the conversations around it from the very beginning.
Yeah, I think it is a mindset shift. The day that I flipped this in my head was stop trying to think that I've got to prove my worth. Because it's not about me, it's about measuring or helping people to see the value that we're bringing and where we're going on this journey. And I think a lot of marketers, for very good reason, because they get it from all angles and they have some quite loud voices to deal with who don't understand but think they know everything about marketing. I think if we can flip that in our head and say, well, actually, what I'm doing here is reporting for the better of the company, to understand what's working, what's not working, preempt risks. You know, there's huge value in marketers who are tuned into their audience, their customer, tuned into the industry they're in, and can actually surface potential issues that are coming. That's value, that's not an ROI. But it's value, and it's value that builds growth, it's value that builds trust. So if as an industry we can kind of have a little word with ourselves and reframe our heads, I think it will help marketing overall as well.
All right. So I've got one final question or discussion point. What kind of practical takeaways should people actually do? What can you actually do?
I think we've talked a lot about around them. So we've talked a lot about it's not one number. We've talked a lot about building a portfolio of elements and using the timings of them correctly. But the biggest one for me is taking some time out to think, what am I measuring? Why am I measuring it? What's the story I want to tell? And managing that expectation before you start on the journey, because there's nothing worse than waiting right to the end of something, somebody coming in and saying, what did we get? What was that back? And you're going, well, I can tell you all these things. You then look like you're justifying and you're backtracking. If you've gone up front and said, this is the project, this is what we're going to do, these are the points at which I will be updating you, these are the things I'm going to tell you, this is what it's going to tell you. I'm not going to be able to give you that one number that you're going to ask me in 3 months' time, but I will be able to give you it in 12 months' time. And if we can't wait that long, then perhaps we shouldn't do this campaign, we're doing the wrong thing. And I think that's the most practical advice I could give, because one size does not fit all. Every single person in this room is in a different type of business, a different stage. And if you're in an SME, it's quite simplistic. Often the return, it's, I need more customers through the door, I need more cash. But our job is to go, yes, but these are the way that we're starting to piece that together. If you're in a very big organisation, you have econometricians that will start crunching those numbers in a very complex way that I can't do because my brain's too small. But you know, you'll have a different thing. And still, I would question that it shouldn't come down just to one financial number. I put this in, I got that.
We talked about, I mean, you said in the beginning, like you have so many different things and you can't track everything and it feels overwhelming. And I think that's okay. You know, there's something there around also looking at what you are measuring and trying to build a picture of what that information can tell you, and then see if there's any gaps or there's any opportunities to add in something or even take something away that could then be replaced at a different point in time. So sort of taking that sort of macro level approach to your measurement and what you're looking at to think about who needs to know what when. And on that point, the other practical thing really is we do an exercise with people around mapping stakeholders to really sort of take that view on who the stakeholders are, what their perspectives are, and what that means for you and the work that you're doing. And I think that can be really, really powerful to just visually see it, to really start thinking about this idea of how you report, how you present, and who needs what information and why they need it, but also where as well there might be that ally or that need to educate and things like that.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is, if you're unsure, if you really don't know where to begin, don't shy away from saying something, or don't just give a number because that's even worse. Have the conversation, because you may find actually your finance guy goes, yeah, this is actually quite complex. I really appreciate you explaining that. What can we do together? How can we help? Becoming an ally with finance is a really good thing to do, whoever that might be, because that's definitely helped me in getting my head around some things and finding measures that are right for that business at that growth stage as well. Because when you're just starting out, you have different measurements that are important to when you're very established. And I think if you start having conversations in those ways and enlist, the senior leadership that look at the more commercial side, it's a game changer. It does shift the power to the marketer a little bit more.
Nice. Lovely. Great way to finish. Does anyone else like to share any challenges or any questions?
I have another question, which is more around like KPIs and metrics, and like how do you, and I know it's kind of how long is a piece of string, it depends on the industry, all of these sorts of things, but so for example, I'm working with a startup at the moment who is yet to launch their business, but that will happen in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks, and you're looking at what they're doing across email, social, website. How do you even, I suppose there's so many different ways you could look at what is the right benchmark, what's the right KPI, are we tracking the right thing, but is it kind of like you just got to test and learn and see what your own benchmark becomes, or?
I think it's thinking about that startup, what are their objectives when they launch, who are they going after? So there are some value conversations that you can have around that. It's fine to have an email list growing, but are they the right people on it? How have they come in? Have they come in through a piece of thought leadership, that was really valuable, and maybe even shared that on LinkedIn and talk, obviously depends on the scale of the organisation that it's going to be and what product they're selling. But, I think it's about finding the story around those values, rather than just saying, well, we've got 1,000 people on the email list or we've got 800 people here. It's really kind of digging in a little bit at that very early stage. Because when we launch, we know we've got, let's say 20% of our base are really hungry and waiting and want it. It's finding those sort of things.
Because I think otherwise there is, sometimes I see is they'll do a podcast, a campaign, whatever it might be, and then have a knee-jerk reaction when things are not working exactly. But it's maybe the benchmark was set in the wrong place, or they need to give it longer. And I suppose it's but it is tricky because they're working with limited budgets, so it can't carry on forever and ever. But it's, I suppose, trying to have a pragmatic conversation to say potentially you haven't given it long enough, or we need to reset expectations depending on where,
And I think it's also educating that there's a sort of dark ROI, as in the things we can't track. So I'll give an example. I sometimes enlist the support of a brilliant SEO, and she is quite prolific in how she talks on LinkedIn, etc. But actually, the leads she gets from me haven't ever seen her LinkedIn. They've come from me, because I've identified a need. It's someone I trust, because I trust them, the people I'm working with trust me, and she gets the gig, right? Now, none of that would be known to her if I hadn't said, oh, by the way, heads up, this person's going to get in touch with you. So, how do you put a value on that as a straight return? Now, that's a simplistic thing, because it's one small business to another small business. In a startup, it's different, but, is there a way, social listening, is there a way of measuring the excitement that's coming up before you've launched? It's kind of thinking a little bit around that, just so you can show momentum. and then being very honest about when you expect to be giving that kind of financial return indication that they're looking for.
It's hard to be able to know when that cut-off point is of going, right, we've waited long enough now, that's obviously not working.
I mean, if the tumbleweed is like on the floor.
I mean, that's always tomorrow, right?
Where there's like, where is that then? It's obvious, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How long, so
Do
like
you wait?
podcast, is like, how long do you wait? Like 4 months?
Yeah.
Seems like a reasonable time to, but it may have been they weren't looking for the right indicators and they needed another month or two.
If you consider only 5% of whatever are ever in market ready,
Yeah.
and that's the thing I always use is saying,
Yeah.
we're going out broad,
Yeah.
we're going to everyone, but only 5% or maybe 7%, depends on what you are going to be ready to buy now. So, and then if you, depending on your product or your service, if you then add in the sort of typical buying cycle and time, or how often they might repeat that. You know, I have one client a few years ago now, and they were a one-time purchase. People aren't going to come because they made the best product and it didn't run out, it didn't wear out, so no one needed to come back in. And so they said, well, but what do we do? Because we want, you know, we've heard that it's cheaper to keep your existing audience buying. And it's like, but that's not your product, that's not the service, that's not. So it's really key to us that we understand how the buying cycle works, why people are buying, and then we frame it that way, I think, and manage expectations.
I suppose also the difficulty with something like a podcast is it may not even be that the podcast isn't working. It might be the way that you're marketing the podcast ultimately at the end of the day. It's like...
Or the way you're tracking leads coming through, so you think it's not working, so you're talking about the SEO, who I think I know.
It's very good.
So she, you know, she's getting those leads from you, yes, but she originally contacted you through her, or you, I probably know where you met her, but she might have other people who have seen her LinkedIn and then they've recommended her on, but she won't track that one as her LinkedIn, but actually if she hadn't done that, it's like, it's whereas what you started off saying, right, it's not a straight line.
No. And we have to be comfortable with that conversation. You said right at the beginning, Harriet, it's very complicated. That's okay. What isn't okay is either not having the conversation or trying to fluff it and give a number, because that's just going to hurt everybody. But it is a very uncomfortable thing not to be able to give, because we know we're doing something, we know we're having an impact, and we can't always pinpoint. I had a CEO many years ago who used to say, I think we need Anna in the room, but I don't know why. To the COO. And they'd wheel me in. And it was because I think marketing, and this is where I really believe marketing has the most value, we're transversal, right? We see everything from the customer we're trying to get to in the market we're in, all the way through to, oh, it's falling down because sales, you know, aren't following up with the right kind of messaging, or, you know, operations haven't got product in stock or aren't giving a good experience, to legal are being too difficult, we can't say the messages we need to say to actually make that. We see all of that, right? And that is value, that is return on the investment of you as a marketer, and we shouldn't be shy of sharing that. Soapbox moment.
We've stunned them into silence.
If there's no other questions, then I think that's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you.